Thank you everyone for coming out tonight to the event Making Feminism Trans Inclusive. Our panellists for this evening are Jo from Cara Friend and Alexa from Transgender NI. Alexa is a trans woman and human rights defender based in Belfast. She founded the Gender Jam Murray Trans Support Group in 2016 and has worked since then to improve access to support and other services for trans people across Northern Ireland. Alexa is a founder and director of Transgender NI, a not-for-profit which advocates for the rights of trans people in Northern Ireland, where she focuses on regional, national and international policy and human rights work. She joined the Northern Ireland Women's Policy Group last year and worked specifically on the health, housing and gender-based violence areas of the Feminist Recovery Plan. That document is available on WRDA's website, by the way, for anyone who is interested. Her current work centres around individual advocacy, healthcare policy development and public awareness efforts, and we're very pleased to have her with us this evening. Jo is the Education and Training Manager at Cara Friend, which is the longest established LGBTQ+ charity in Northern Ireland, and it works with young people aged between 12 and 25. During COVID-19, Jo and the Cara Friends youth team developed a safe space online to support LGBTQ+ people. Jo also established a family support group during the same period, providing parents of LGBTQ+ young people a place to find professional and peer support. As Education and Training Manager, Jo has developed Cara Friends' new LGBTQ+ Inclusive Schools Charter. The Charter requires schools to engage meaningfully with their LGBTQ+ community and develop a more inclusive and respectful educational environment. Jo is responsible for training a team of all-out anti-bullying workshop volunteers to assist in the delivery of these workshops. Jo has a degree in psychology and a postgrad qualification in children's rights from Queen's, and she plays the ukulele with the Belfast Ukulele Jam and is owned by her fluff baby Juno, who is a 4-year-old Border Collie Cross. And we're very glad to have you both here this evening. So without further ado, we'll just dive on into the questions. Alexa, if I could start with you and then we'll go on to Jo. What does a trans-inclusive feminist organisation look like?
Well, thanks for starting with me first off. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having us here for this panel. Very excited for it. What does a trans-inclusive feminist organisation look like? Well, what it looks like is constantly changing, really, constantly evolving and constantly working on itself. What it looks like is an organisation that centres the voices of trans women, does not devalue them as women because they are also trans, and centres trans issues and specifically issues affecting trans women as women's issues, because that is what they are. A trans-inclusive feminist organisation is also one that doesn't treat non-binary people as like a subset or a subsection of women as well, because it's really important when we're talking about issues affecting, you know, minority genders or issues affecting women, cis and trans. We're using the terms to describe the groups and the people that we're actually talking about. We're not just lumping a bunch of people in because we think that, oh, that's what women and non-binary people mean. It means all the femme-presenting ones. That's, you know, it's fine. A trans-inclusive feminist organization is one that kind of knows what it's talking about, the one that has trans women through every level of the organization, where trans women feel safe engaging at every level of the organization, as a service user, as a volunteer, as a staff member, as a board member, where their voices are heard at those levels as well, where it's not just tokenism but actual like integration as well. I think, yeah, that's all I have to say. I could talk for forever on this because really it's such a vast issue, and it's one that, I mean, you know, we need to also center the voices of sex workers, of a lot of whom are trans women, of women of color, of traveler women, of disabled women, and in a lot of those cases, in particular with disability, there's large kind of overlaps with trans communities as well. So it's important not just to have a trans inclusive feminist organization, but a truly inclusive and intersectional feminist organization as well.
Thanks, Alex. That was really comprehensive and interesting. Jo, if you want to jump in with your response of what does a trans inclusive feminist organization look like?
Well, I mean, Alexa said pretty much all of it there, but I suppose it's one that sees women, as a diverse group, including trans women, that they're trans women are part of that group. I suppose it's an organization that is aware of the perception, is aware and kind of combats the perception that women are less than, and that trans women are less than, that it identifies that and actually tries to combat it. And I suppose it's an organization that empowers women within an organization and dissolves the barriers that have been set up to hold women back, and pushes women, all women, trans women included, into those positions of authority and leadership within those organizations. So that's really all I would have to add to what Alexa was saying.
Well, that's grand, because you're going to get a chance to go first this time round, Jo. So we've talked a wee bit there about what trans inclusive feminism looks like at a structural level. But I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what trans inclusive feminism looks like in everyday life. And Jo, we'll be starting with you this time.
I suppose it's about inclusivity. Really, I think it's about making sure that all women, trans women, have their voice, that they are seen, that they are seen as, they're truly seen as women, and that they're accepted at all levels in society. But I think at the core of it, it's about inclusivity. It's about respect. It's about people, seeing trans women for who they are. So that's what I think about that. Yeah.
And Alexa, if we could get your response to that now, what does trans inclusive feminism look like in everyday life?
Absolutely, I think that inclusivity is really, really important. I think being inclusive and kind of not just being inclusive, but being an ally to trans women and trans community generally looks like it's proactive work. It requires proactive work to support trans women and to, challenge transphobia wherever you see it. It's absolutely vital that it's not just like, I think a lot of the times we keep our allyship for whenever the groups are in the room, or for whenever a trans person is in the room, or a person of color or a disabled person. We show our oats there and make sure that they see it, and make sure that we're being an out and proud ally. But it looks like challenging transphobia wherever you see it, not just where we can see you see it, because it's also about recognizing that actually you won't know a trans person when you meet them. Like, you're not going to be able to, every trans person you meet, you'll be able to say, okay, I've clocked them, I know that they're trans. We're everywhere, not to be the the kind of the all-powerful trans lobby that we're often portrayed as, but really trans people aren't just confined to LGBT centers and gay clubs. We're in your workplace, we're in your school, we're in your friend group. You just might not know it yet. We might not have come out, or we might have come out a long time ago and just not been open about our trans identity. And so it's recognizing that wherever you are, being inclusive and kind of challenging transphobia, and platforming the issues and needs of trans people. If you volunteer in an organization, if you are running for your student union presidency, or if whatever it is that you're doing, because we all have our own things, you know, making sure that you're working to include trans people in that as well, or make sure that they could be if they wanted to. That's what it looks like in everyday life.
Well, thanks very much. So it's about being inclusive in your everyday life and about challenging transphobia consistently, not just when you think a trans person might see you, but living that as a consistent principle in your life. That is really interesting. Just to get some comments through in the chat there, and just to apologise that we don't have closed captions turned on. I'm sorry about that, and I know that the bell is interfering with some people's assistive technology. I am trying to figure out how to turn the bell off, but hopefully everyone has joined by now. But I am trying to get rid of the bell. So apologies for that. I will know for again. So our third question, we will start again with Alexa and move back to Joe. The academic and cyclist Kim Humphreys has described feminism in the UK as viciously divided by transphobia. Do you think feminism in Northern Ireland is in the same state?
No. I don't think so. I don't think we're perfect. I think that, you know, there's still a lot of work to do, and you know, it's a constant thing to be worked on. I wouldn't say viciously divided. I would say there are still fault lines. There are still divides there, and there is still transphobia. Like, you know, even if, you know, the organizations and you know, kind of folks working in policy or whatever, are kind of working to be inclusive, there's always going to be pockets of transphobia in every movement. There is, and it's about proactively and kind of endlessly working to kind of address that. I think that, you know, issues around the kind of inclusion of trans people in abortion activism, and you know, the use of kind of people who can get pregnant, and similarly with access to period products and stuff like that. I think that, you know, anytime one of those posts goes viral, I think that it does kind of show the front lines there, and shows that there's still a lot of education to do, a lot of learning to do on kind of on all sides, in terms of how we can work together and how we can kind of support each other's movements and each other's issues, because often they are so intricately shared. The issue of bodily autonomy, the issue of reproductive and sexual justice, and health, are both just inherently women's issues. They're trans issues, they're LGBT issues, they're disabled issues, they're issues for racialized communities. They are issues that genuinely unite us, but in some areas of the UK, they are being used to artificially divide us. And I think that it's worth kind of recognizing where these kind of divides across the UK came from. And the reality is they came from mostly a reform of the Gender Recognition Act of 2004, that was suggested by the UK government in 2016, 5 years ago. Just in case, I need to kind of emphasize that. It has been dragged out for 5 goddamn years, and those 5 years have been used to demonize and target and marginalize trans people in the public eye. We have seen almost weekly, sometimes daily, at like really bad moments, kind of target, like kind of hateful and misinformative, and kind of misleading reporting around what the reform of the Gender Recognition Act means for instance, for the rights of women, and you know, how many trans kids there are these days. Oh my goodness, isn't it awful that people can get access to information and support? And you know, so just a kind of endless barrage of nonsense that really has given the impression and given the kind of facade almost of a divided movement within feminism. But the reality is that it is a minority of people. It's a minority of people with a pretty large platform to say a lot of things. You know, they're in the liberal media, they're in the Guardian, they're in the New Statesman. You know, they're not just confined to the kind of Tories of the Telegraph and the you know, the newsletter, God forbid. I really do think that it's overemphasized, and it's been allowed to get that way just because of the way that they have been funded by, you know, anti-trans and anti-feminist actors from kind of the US and places like that. And also just the way that they have been consistently platformed in discussions in the media, where trans people have not. The BBC takes a policy of having one anti-trans voice on a panel discussion, at least whenever trans issues are being discussed. There's no requirement to have a trans person there. There's no guarantee that a trans person will be offered a platform to discuss trans issues. It's always the anti-trans actors, and in reality, what they are anti-feminist actors, who get that platform and who get to spread their hate.
Thanks very much. That was a really interesting response. And yes, it is a minority, and they are a focal minority. And there is this idea of a false balance where, you know, if you want to speak up about human rights, you have to have someone on who's, you know, against it. That's what it boils down to. It is that ludicrous. But yes, it is a minority, but they are noisy. Joe, if we could get your response to that. The UK is viciously divided by transphobia. Do you think feminism in Northern Ireland is in the same state?
I do feel that there is a little bit of a difference between, you know, other parts of the UK and Northern Ireland, just historically speaking. And I see that in a lot of issues with regards to LGBTQ plus issues, you know, whether it's with regards to, you know, opinions in schools, or about how transgender people are treated in general. Even, you know, looking at our census, you know, there's a question about sexual orientation, but there's no question this year about gender identity. So I do think when you look at the UK in a whole, England and Scotland and Wales, you know, were able to move forward on a lot of social issues over the years. And because Northern Ireland was going through the troubles, we were held back in a lot of ways. And I do think to some degree that does have an impact on people's understanding of trans issues here, and understanding of, you know, maybe seeing transgender people as you know, including them, you know, in certain things like the census. So I do feel that there is a little bit of difference from the rest of the UK and Northern Ireland. I think what Alexa was saying is true. But I do think there are certain special circumstances that does set Northern Ireland apart, culture, religion, that, you know, ultimately do play a part in this issue. Obviously, these two issues, as Alexa says, are quite similar in women's rights, trans rights, feminism. You know, it's all quite closely linked. But I do think because there is such a lack of understanding with regards to trans issues in particular, you know, when I go into schools and I talk to schools, or I give I give training sessions to teachers, it's always the trans issues that, you know, are most hotly debated, and the information that is really has a lack of understanding behind it. So I do think that plays a part. And until there's more of an awareness in general in society about trans issues, I think it will continue to play a part.
Thanks very much. That was really shocking that it's not in the census this year. That's very disappointing. We will be moving on to audience questions shortly. So if you do have a question, pop it into the chat, and we will get through those at the end. So to kind of end the panel discussion on, I suppose, a slightly more upbeat note, something that we can take away and implement in our own lives and organisations. We'll start with Jo this time and go on to Alexa. How do we starve the trans exclusionary pseudo-feminist narrative of oxygen?
Self off mute for starters. I think the way to starve it is really through education. I am a big believer that if you educate people, you're giving them knowledge. If you give people knowledge, then they have an understanding. If they have an understanding, then they have to be more inclusive. They have to be more respectful. So I think the way that you deal with people who are, you know, who are transphobic is to really educate everybody else and give those people, you know, a balanced opinion, a balanced approach, a real understanding of these issues, so that when people hear, you know, those extremist views, they're viewed as being extreme because they're so outrageous. So I think it's that. So really focusing on education, educating our young people, educating society in general. I also think it's not giving those individuals the platform, not allowing them to hold, you know, that narrative or to push out that negativity. And the only way you do that is by not giving them the platform to speak. But the main way for me, the way I look at it is if it's extremism. So the way that you deal with extremism is through education and showing a balanced approach to these issues and giving people knowledge. And that's how I believe you can combat it.
Thanks very much, Jo. That is really interesting. It's about providing people with the knowledge so that they can recognise extremism when they see it. That's really interesting. Alexa, if you'd like to jump in with your take on that.
No, I mean, I 100% agree. I think that education is really important, and it involves kind of peeling back these kind of pseudo-feminist narratives for what they are, which is transphobia, which is misogyny. You know, it's reducing women to their genitals, essentially, is what it's doing. And as well, you know, it's kind of, generally speaking, a lot of these kind of anti-trans narratives around, you know, what will happen if we reform the Gender Recognition Act, and, you know, what will happen if trans women start using women's bathrooms, oh my goodness, and, you know, what do we do with all these trans kids? You know, a lot of those are just based in outright lies. You know, trans people have been using the bathrooms which align with our gender for many years now. We're legally protected in doing that across the UK, including in Northern Ireland. You know, this isn't up for debate. And realistically, when you're talking about forcing trans people out of bathrooms and forcing trans people out of discussions about trans issues, you're talking about forcing trans people out of public life, and out of engaging in feminism. And you're right, that is extremism. And, you know, I think it's also recognizing, you know, the term TERF is bandied about quite a lot. And I do think that it's a bit of a misnomer, because a lot of these people aren't radical feminists. they're actually liberals. A lot of them are conservatives. You know, if you look at the LGB Alliance, it's been set up as a kind of, you know, pseudo-feminist, pseudo-LGB, anti-trans organization. It claimed to advocate for lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. They released a list of, I think, 12 questions for MPs to ask ahead of the last election. None of them were about lesbian, gay, and bisexual issues. They're all about trans people. And once you really look at these people for what they are, it's a little bit obsessive. It's you know, especially with the folks who are kind of constantly at it, constantly platformed, constantly tweeting about how much of a danger trans people are. It's kind of like, especially when you're living in Northern Ireland, and it's like, okay, read the room, folks. We don't have abortion access. We, you know, we're going through a economic turmoil. You know, our universal credit system is banjaxed. Why are we fighting with each other? And you know, again, just kind of constantly making links back to, okay, how are these groups being funded? Where are these narratives coming from? Are they maybe being used to divide our movement and make us less effective at our activism and at our advocacy for both women and trans people of all genders? I really do think that, you know, once you peel back, once you peel off a few layers, and you know, gets to the heart of what it really is, it's all misogyny. It's all rooted in patriarchy. It's all rooted in the marginalization of trans voices and of women's voices. What you'll notice is that a lot of these people in the kind of anti-trans movement and in the kind of pseudo-feminist and trans exclusionary movement are men. they're men who are using transphobia as a vehicle, as a kind of more acceptable vehicle for their misogyny, and they're being enabled in that. So you know, it's not easy to break through it all, because trans groups, feminist organizations, and movements, we're also desperately underfunded, desperately kind of overworked. We all have so much work to do. And like, you know, being on the women's policy group, working with you lovely folks in WRDA on a kind of daily and weekly basis, it really does just kind of show that you know, we're all bloody busy, and we don't need to be, you know, taking up our valuable time with these kind of transphobes, with these transphobes who genuinely mean no good for our movements, do not want the best for our movements, and you know, want to see us all fail, and you know, the best way to tackle that is to continue working together, to continue platforming trans voices, platforming women's issues in trans communities as well, and recognizing them as the joint movements that they are.
Thanks so much. That was a really comprehensive answer. It's about centering intersectionality and making sure that we can recognize extremism when we see it, and also about insisting that we cannot negotiate on human rights. They are non-negotiable, and that goes for trans people just as much as anybody else. We cannot negotiate on human rights. So that is very important. I saw something interesting on someone's Twitter. I won't mention them because they're not in tonight, but they said about kind of cancel culture and all the rest of it. And they said that, you know, the next time someone says to you that deplatforming doesn't work, ask them when was the last time they heard from Katie Hopkins or Stephen Yaxley Lennon. And I thought to myself, yes, you know, that is proof that deplatforming does work. And certainly that's something which we would engage in. I think as a feminist organisation, we would not promote or engage with an event that had a transphobic speaker, even if they were speaking about a completely different issue. I think that kind of solidarity is important, very definitely. But yeah, I think that's how we starve them of oxygen. And whenever we were talking about tonight's event, we made a very deliberate decision, prompted by Alexa, who I thank for helping me find some knowledge on this issue. We made a very deliberate decision not to use the term TERF, because we felt that it allocated to them their own kind of portion of feminism. They were still within the feminist sort of tint, whereas we already have a word for those people. It's transphobes. Let's just use that, because that's what they are. You cannot be a transphobe and be a feminist. There's no such thing, I suppose, as a TERF. They're a transphobe. So I think that's brought us to the end of the kind of formal panel discussion. We're going to move on now to some of the questions that have been coming through in the chat. So we're going to end the recording at this point.